December 16th, 1944, early morning. Moskau, Germany. The frozen earth trembled as American artillery screamed overhead, but something was terrifyingly different this morning. The shells weren't striking the ground. They were detonating in mid-air, precisely above advancing German positions, creating a lethal rain of steel fragments that no foxhole could protect against. Among the 326th Volksgrenadier Division, attacking the 38th Cavalry Squadron's positions, soldiers who had survived years on the Eastern Front encountered something that defied their understanding of warfare. These weren't the predictable artillery patterns they knew. This was death delivered from above with mathematical precision. At that moment, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group made one of the most consequential unauthorized decisions of the Battle of the Bulge. Against standing orders, without permission from higher command, he ordered his gunners to load shells, equipped with the most closely guarded secret in the Allied arsenal: proximity fuses. These devices, containing miniature radar systems that could detect their distance from targets and detonate at optimal height, would multiply artillery lethality by a factor of 50 million. Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, had begun with tremendous promise for the Wehrmacht. Hitler's last gamble involved 200,000 German soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces, all massed in secret through the fog-shrouded Ardennes. The initial bombardment at 0530 hours achieved complete tactical surprise. German artillery fired 1,600 rounds per minute along the 85-mile front. American intelligence had failed catastrophically. But at Moskau, Colonel Axelson faced an impossible situation. The 38th Cavalry Squadron was being overwhelmed by superior German forces. Conventional artillery couldn't stop the assault. In desperation, Axelson made his historic decision to deploy proximity-fused shells without authorization, a choice that could have earned him court-martial. The effect was immediate and devastating. German soldiers advancing in traditional assault formations suddenly found themselves under fire they'd never experienced. The shells exploded 30 to 50 feet above them, each detonation creating a cone of fragments covering vastly more area than conventional ground-burst shells. Veterans who knew how to take cover from normal artillery were cut down in their foxholes, behind trees and ditches, anywhere they sought shelter. The proximity fuse represented the convergence of American scientific innovation and industrial capacity at their absolute peak. Unlike conventional shells requiring direct impact or time fuses that often detonated at wrong heights, the proximity fuse contained a self-contained radar system no larger than a coffee can. Inside each fuse, American engineers had packed 130 electronic components, including 4 or 5 miniature vacuum tubes that could withstand the incredible 20,000 times gravity force of being fired from artillery. Dr. Merle Tuve at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory had driven this development with Manhattan Project-level intensity. The laboratory, disguised as an abandoned used car dealership in Silver Spring, Maryland, employed 3% of all American physicists at peak production. Security matched that of the atomic bomb program. Workers couldn't discuss their work, even with families. The technical challenges seemed insurmountable. Vacuum tubes designed for living room radios had to survive being fired from cannons while spinning at extreme rotational speeds. They had to function in all weather conditions and be sensitive enough to detect targets without premature detonation. The breakthrough came through miniaturization techniques that would later revolutionize the electronics industry. Dr. James Van Allen's tubes were no larger than pencil erasers, yet contained all the elements of conventional radio tubes. By December 1944, American factories were producing 40,000 proximity fuses daily. Over 100 companies contributed to the effort, from RCA and General Electric to Sylvania and Crosley Corporation. The program's cost reached $1 billion in 1940s dollars, second only to the Manhattan Project in wartime spending. Axelson's unauthorized use on December 16th created an immediate command crisis, but the devastating effectiveness at Monschau was undeniable. The German attack had been stopped cold. Word of the weapon's impact reached Supreme Headquarters rapidly. General Eisenhower, recognizing the desperate situation developing across the Ardennes, formally requested authorization on December 19th. By December 21st, all restrictions were lifted and proximity fuses were released for general ground combat use across the entire Bulge battlefield. The siege of Bastogne provided the perfect demonstration of proximity fuses in defensive warfare. The 101st Airborne Division, completely surrounded and outnumbered, held the vital crossroads against repeated German assaults. Between December 19th and 31st, the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion fired 7,676 rounds. While not all were proximity fused due to limited supply, those that were had devastating effects. German assault formations simply melted away under the airburst barrages, with entire platoons eliminated in seconds. The December 22nd attack, following General McAuliffe's famous "nuts" reply to the German surrender demand, showcased the weapon's effectiveness. German infantry advancing across snow-covered fields in traditional formations were caught in the open. The proximity-fused shells detonated overhead with precise timing, creating overlapping patterns of destruction that left no safe zones. Perhaps the most thoroughly documented demonstration of proximity fuse lethality occurred at the Sour River on Christmas Day. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was driving north to relieve Bastogne, personally witnessed this engagement. A German battalion attempting to cross the partially frozen river believed they were hidden by darkness and fog. Traditional artillery would have required careful adjustment of fire, giving Germans time to complete their crossing or seek cover. Patton wrote, "We caught a German battalion crossing the Sour. The new Posit ammunition was devastating. When the firing stopped, we counted 702 bodies." This figure, 702 killed by actual count, represents one of the few precisely documented casualty figures from proximity fuse employment. A single battalion essentially ceased to exist in minutes, with no possibility of escape or defense. The Ardennes' dense forests, which Germans counted on for concealment, became death traps when proximity fuses entered the equation. The airbursts shattered tree branches, creating thousands of additional wooden projectiles. Traditional defensive positions, taking cover behind large trees, digging foxholes under root systems, became useless. The fragments and splinters came from above, negating centuries of tactical wisdom about forest fighting. The proximity fuse operated on principles that seemed like science fiction to 1940 soldiers. Each fuse contained a tiny radio transmitter operating at 180-220 megahertz, continuously sending out waves that reflected off objects: ground, trees, vehicles, human bodies. When reflected signal strength reached predetermined intensity corresponding to optimal burst height, an electronic switch triggered detonation. The German intelligence failure regarding proximity fuses proved catastrophic. In December 1944, Wehrmacht forces overran an American ammunition depot, capturing approximately 20,000 proximity-fused shells. German technical experts examined the captured fuses and declared them impossible. The presence of vacuum tubes in artillery shells contradicted everything they believed about electronics and ballistics. They concluded Americans were using some form of magnetic detection, or that visible components were decoys. This failure stemmed partly from institutional blindness. Germany had actually led proximity fuse development before the war. Rheinmetall Borsig and AEG Berlin had working prototypes by 1940. But Hitler's order canceling all weapons projects requiring more than 6 months to production had terminated the program. German engineers couldn't believe Americans had solved problems they themselves had abandoned. By January 1945, maintaining secrecy became impossible. Too many shells had been fired. Too many soldiers had witnessed their effects. German intelligence finally grasped the weapon's significance too late. A January 10th report stated, "The Americans possess a radio-controlled artillery fuse that detonates shells at optimal height for anti-personnel effect. This weapon has caused severe casualties among our forces in the Ardennes. No effective countermeasures exist." Post-war analysis revealed proximity fuse's decisive impact. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt stated, "The proximity fuse was decisive. Our attacks broke down not because of American courage, though they fought well, but because of artillery that seemed to have eyes." General Hasso von Manteuffel testified, "The American artillery was the terror of our soldiers, especially the new shells that exploded in the air." The statistics tell the story. 200,000 proximity-fused shells fired, accounting for an estimated 15,000, 20,000 German casualties, up to 20% of total German losses. The weapon achieved 5 to 10 times greater effectiveness than conventional ammunition, while requiring no forward observation in poor weather. The Battle of the Bulge ended January 25, 1945, with German forces in full retreat. Hitler's last offensive had cost Germany approximately 100,000 casualties, while achieving nothing. The proximity fuse had proven itself not merely as an artillery improvement, but as a revolution in warfare technology that fundamentally changed combat. From Colonel Axelson's unauthorized first use on December 16th, through the systematic deployment of 200,000 shells across the Ardennes, proximity fuse demonstrated that scientific innovation could provide decisive military advantage. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the age of technological warfare truly arrived. The mathematics of death were rewritten by tiny radar sets in artillery shells, forever changing how humans wage war.